Hello and welcome, Exile, to the build I'm considering playing for Blast from the Past, which is a Chieftain Righteous Fire. I just did my Exarch and Eater in about 10 hours and 30 minutes roughly was my live split, and then our slash deaths is about 25 times. Take with that what you will. I'm going to go ahead and get into a T15 rare Mesa here just to give you some idea of what it looks like while we're mapping. We'll do Eater Influence. Now let's do Exarch Influence. I don't freaking know. It doesn't really matter. 84 max all res, about 19k armor without flask, 30k with flask. And then we have a little bit of block, and we have Dawnbreaker. It's just what we got from Exarch, which is better than our initial rare shield. This isn't really good gear. It's just two 4-links, a 4-link Fire Trap and a 4-link Righteous Fire. And I just wanted to give you a showcase of what this looks like if you were just bum rushing straight to red maps. You still have underleveled gems for the content, but the Explode does kind of carry your clear a little bit. The idea, or the reason why I'm considering Blast from the Past RF Chieftain, is specifically because with Sentinels being the league mechanic we're going to be basically trying to build around the most, which is recombinating gear. Essentially, there were these Sentinels called the, it's not Stalker, I kind of forget the name of them, but they were the blue Sentinels where you would click them and they would charge an entire pack of monsters. And I'm thinking what would be fun to do is do Expedition with the big bomb keystone where you blow up and you unleash all the Expedition mobs right away. And then essentially use Chieftain's Explode to try to detonate the entire thing. And then I was thinking kind of more of like a map rushing strategy. The thing about the Explode is, although it is 5%, the good news is it's really big AoE. So it ends up being a lot better than initially I thought it would be, just because all the explosion sources we have in the game are actually quite small. But this one is actually really, really large. And the other thing this can do is if you get an Ignite Prolift and you get some decent Ignite duration, you can take this build, or just Chieftain in general. It's an easy way to get into Simulacrums early, because if you kill one monster, it explodes and ignites a pack, and that leftover Prolift can carry you through an entire Simulacrum wave. So that's what it looks like doing a T15 boss. The damage isn't like OP, it isn't bad either. Somewhere in between is how I would put it. We're doing Punishment as a curse, and we're doing the -20 res node. The idea here is essentially, and I still believe this to be the case, outside of the Explode, which is going to essentially hard carry our ability to clear and our ability to do Expedition, this Ascendancy, in my opinion, is quite weak. Until, or basically once you get to +1 curse. Initially, the -20 res node is decently okay as a damage node, but once you get to the gear level where you can anoint +1 curse, the -20 res node becomes kind of superfluous or irrelevant or just weak in general, because once you consider LA weakness plus flammability, it's just not very competitive. That being said, the -20 res node is really great early on when you're just you're valuing all your maps. You get random maps with all res, curse effect, all these things that would kind of just screw you over on a normal map, on a normal RF build. Chieftain gets around, and so that's why I think Chieftain early game as a league starter is good. I don't think late game it's good. I think late game you respec to a Juggernaut, or you re-roll to an Inquisitor, or you re-roll to just something that isn't Chieftain, because ultimately Chieftain's getting hard carried by the Explode for early clear when most builds or most people don't have access to something like the Maven Boots, the Legacy of Furies, which can kind of carry clear too. But the second you get to the budget range where you're getting Legacy of Fury, you're getting that extra minus res, you're getting a +1 curse, this becomes a whole lot less not necessary for RF's clear to feel good. And on top of that, this node is also becoming not even worth picking up. It's a damage downgrade once you consider an additional curse. And then you're basically just like, okay, I'm a Chieftain and I have 90 max fire res. It's not a very good feeling situation. That being said, early league start, the Explode is relevant because there's not a lot of sources of it, and it works pretty decently, and you can do it to do early cheese on something like Simulacrum. And the -20 res node, very early league, when you can't afford like a +1 curse or something, you don't have to compete with that opportunity cost yet. It's still a competitive node to click. Now, this is the tree I ended up with at level 85, just going for some max res, going for Call to Arms with Infernal Cry for some extra pops to mix in with my Explode, grabbing the Templar AoE and Templar damage here, the minion damage nodes, and then the classic dot nodes over here in this area. I think this is pretty standard-ish for an RF tree. Eventually, as you min-max more, you want to lean more into going to more clusters and more jewel sockets. Jewel sockets are king when it comes to Righteous Fire, but initially on a league start, you just don't have that. Now, I have made leveling trees specifically for this build that I'm going to show you right now. All right, now looking at our leveling trees, Marauder is iffy in the first act, but it picks up by the second once you can equip Righteous Fire. First things first, we are going straight over to versatility because attributes are a problem. We're going to run into int requirements, dex requirements. I like this early. Eventually, I want to unspec out of it, but initially, it's just a good idea so you can level up your Magma Orb, level up your Frostblink, and the leveling process can go smoothly. Then it's all about going straight to RF regen mastery right here. The idea is pretty simple. When you're league starting Righteous Fire, you want to be able to start this right away from level 16 or 17 when you get this mastery. And all you really need is you need ruby rings and you need to benchcraft fire res on gear. The way you do this is fire res benchcraft is one transmute. So essentially all the magic, all the rare items you ID, unless it's like a rare item for a gear slot you don't have yet, just sell them on ID'd. You'll get a bunch of transmute shards, and by the time you get to level 17, you should have 4 or 5 transmutes sitting around to be able to benchcraft fire res on every gear piece you can, and that will give you a bunch of regen for this mastery. Every fire res over 0 is 1 regen. So if you have 100 fire res, 150, even if you're capped at 75, you're getting that full 150 regen per second. This is massive. This will sustain your Righteous Fire pretty much all the way till your first lab, and it's the way we get Righteous Fire online and started on the character as quickly as possible. Now, that being said, I will note initially, damage is going to be really rough because our only damage nodes is Arsonist. It's not a great initial experience. Our Act 1's slow, and our Act 2 is kind of slow. But we fix that by going straight for all damage nodes initially. We're going to go straight to Divine Judgment, straight to Spiritual Age, straight to Holy Fire. This is essentially just to start to pick up that damage and catch up the damage. We, as a Marauder, have a great early nodes which have life and armor. Those are great, but the regen, the damage is lacking, and so we're gonna prioritize getting damage as quickly as we can. And that first lab, it's all about the minus 20 res node, again, prioritizing damage. You might think the first node you should go for is Tassilio. I would recommend against this. Initially, when you're hitting that first lab, we should be running Purity of Elements, and we should be putting a bunch of fire res in our gear. Resistances shouldn't really be our top problem to solve. We should be pretty much capped at res at this point, and I'd much rather prefer going for the damage. Now, if you are struggling for res, if you'd rather just be a bit safer, you can go for Tassilios, but your damage is going to be weaker throughout the campaign. So that's why we went this way for Chieftain. And then following it up, when we go to our second lab, that's when we start doing things like picking up Sovereignty Wheel. That allows us to put Determination and Purity of Elements on, and then we put Vitality on our life pool to allow us to get a max res and to fit in the life regen for it while also having mana left over. On top of that, we're getting our less damage taken mastery with Acrimony, and we're picking up the regen from Hardy. As you level up and you get more HP into the build, you start to take a higher degen. We also grab Templar for some great damage, AoE, and life. But as I was saying, as you level up, you get more life into the build, that increases the self-degen Righteous Fire has on you. This means we need to start investing into more regen throughout the tree, and that's why I went into Hardy here. That's why I go to get less damage taken mastery. It's so we can still sustain. I'd highly recommend checking out early uniques like Kikazaro to help supplement your sustain. If you're having sustain problems, should be like a T5 unique. It's really common, should be 1 alc on trade, should be an easy pickup if you want to keep your eye out for something like that. That's the idea I like to go with a lot of times when I league start, is something that caps our regen, helps it nice. But Hardy investment, getting the regen mastery, stuff like this should help you continue to sustain as you go out throughout the campaign. We follow that up with, on our second lab, I go for Hinakoras. I personally believe by the time I'm getting this Cruel lab, I still should have my resistances mostly capped. I'm still running Purity of Elements. I think Hinakoras for a little bit extra clear throughout the campaign is a good idea. Make it go a little bit faster, have some fun pops and fun explodes, and save off Tassilio till the Merc lab. And at the Merc lab, then we grab Tassilios. This allows us to start investing into Fire and Chaos Res crafts on every piece of gear we can to start capping off our Chaos Res for campaign, or not campaign maps, and as well as it makes it so we need less of either all the other resistances on our gear, and it preps us for that extra minus 30 res we're about to take going out of the campaign by killing Kitala. As well as that, we also, on this level 68 range, about the time we get to around 60 or 55, you're going to start speccing down here and around and doing this connection here and respecking this thing here. Throughout the campaign, you should get like 10, 12 regret points, and you should be able to unspec out of these nodes and then do this respec here, and then switch your Fire Mastery region over to one of the other Fire Masteries we have, as well as start picking up max res here, and max res here. This is all about getting the fire res higher, so that way we take less damage from a Righteous Fire, and we're a little bit tankier, and we fix our pathing early on, which we needed to go this way to get the regen mastery, but ultimately, you want to drop it because it's not super efficient pathing. Maybe doing something like this is okay if you have extra passives, but by the time you're getting to level 85, you should start to have a few chaos orbs to your name, and maybe be looking at buying things like jewel sockets with life and fire dom multi, life and burn damage, and start trying to fill out some of these jewel sockets is what I would look at personally. All right, that is the third lab. This is your setup going into maps, and then finally, when you get to level 85, this is about what we have right now. I went for things like Call to Arm with Infernal Cry for some extra explode, extra clear, and covering enemies in Ash, along with mixing in things like the AoE over here and the regen over here, Surge of Vigor. This is something where I don't recommend it unless you have sustain problems. Ultimately, if you have a Kikazaro, if you have a Rise of the Phoenix, you shouldn't have as much sustain problems as I did in SSF, so you probably shouldn't need this cluster here, but something to consider to grab if you need a bit more regen in the build. Anyways, that is the setup for the RF Chieftain, and you're also grabbing Valakos. I should note here, there is a pretty pivotal change we make when doing Uber Lab, and that's swapping out of Purity of Elements. I say this for all RF characters. Purity of Elements is goated early because Purity of Fire doesn't give you much max res until it's a higher level. I highly recommend running Purity of Elements early, have that ailment immunity, have the easier res cap, and then save getting Purity of Fire in your build later when you have the ability to get something like Brine King, freeze immunity, reduction, and chill, solve those other ailments, and then you can swap to Purity of Fire when it's higher level, and it will actually give you some max res. Because early on, you're going to finish the campaign, you're going to have a level 14 Purity of Fire, and it's going to be giving you like 2 max fire res. Very, very low value compared to ailment immunity, and getting cold and lightning res and capping resistances a little bit easier. So that's what I would consider if I were you. But once you get to this fourth lab, you've gotten the freeze immunity, you've got the chill reduction from Brine King, you have unaffected by Ignite from Chieftain. Then what I like to do is I like to swap Purity of Fire and Tempest Shield for the Purity of Elements. That'll cover our shock community, give us spell block, make us tankier. And then at that point, we're getting like 3 max fire res from the Purity of Fire. It's like level 17 or 18. It's actually pretty decent at that point, and it works out okay. Eventually, you want to get that Purity of Fire to level 23 by having a level 21 gem, and then getting like a +2 AoE gloves or helmet or whatever to level it up. But that's the idea behind Purity of Fire and the swap. And as for our other gems, we have things like cast and damage taking Molten Shell for a bit of tank because of our armor, Blood Rage while we're running around for just additional frenzy charges and just speed, and then other things like Punishment is what we use because we have the set minus res, which means we can't subtract the res further, and Punishment just gives us a nice damage boost whenever we take the enemies to halfway HP. Then we have that extra damage boost come in for more, basically, DPS. And then on top of that, just our 2 4-links between Fire Trap and Righteous Fire. That is the setup of the build. That is the RF Chieftain. I think this character is one that can do well on a League start, and it's the one I am testing, planning on maybe doing for Blast from the Past. I am going to be running a test with a Guardian Righteous Fire as well, trying to finish an Exarch Eater run before the League goes live, and I'll make my final decision after that run completes. We'll see what I go with, but this one I think can be pretty decent for Blast from the Past just because of that boom, explode, ascendancy point, and doing that with the sentinel trigger and proc on all the enemies. That's what I'm thinking about, but at the same time, I don't know. I probably could just blow up the pack with Infernal Cry as well, so I have some things to consider. Anyways, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. As always, thanks for watching, Exiles. Take care and peace out.